how many other people maybe feel the way we feel about, oh, why can't I just do it? Or why can't I get out of my own way? If you've heard that before, like this is going to be something that maybe brings a little solace, like, oh, other people deal with this too. Welcome back to In Residence. I'm Keith.
And I'm Laura.
All right. So last time we were talking about getting started.
Yes. The place to start.
Yes. And we kind of got on a tangent of perfectionism, right? It's a way that we have seen that prevents me from starting. And my perfectionism is a way for me to kind of hide from starting, right? I don't want to start something if I don't think I can do it right. I don't want to start something sometimes because it just doesn't seem like it's something I can do, I guess. But you said to me that isn't always the case for you. And so you said perfectionism doesn't necessarily show up in preventing you from starting.
Right.
So I want to talk to you a little bit more about what perfectionism is for you, or like how it's showing up for you.
Perfectionism for me, and I think when we were recording last time and talking through it, it shows up for me, but in more of a specific way, I guess. Because I don't necessarily have a hard time starting most things or even finishing things because I think that they won't be perfect. I think last time we talked, I'm a little bit more ready, fire, aim. But perfectionism for me shows up more so in kind of looking, it's almost more relationship based for me, like showing up the way I want to be seen and have people view me in the way that I think that I should be or I should show up. And so it's this interesting, it's not quite people pleasing, but it's a feeling of making sure that I'm showing up in a way and coming across in a way and perceived in a way that I want to be seen or viewed as, if that makes sense. And so sometimes my perfectionism, like not posting things on LinkedIn or something like that. Sometimes the reason I hesitate isn't because I'm concerned about starting. I'm more concerned about how will I show up and what will people think and how will they perceive what I put out there. It's the same thing with this podcast. How will I show up? How will people perceive it? And is it in an alignment with what I want them to see and what I want them to take away from me? Yeah. I don't know if that makes sense.
That's not really something I've thought a lot about before. I mean, I care what people think of me. I care what certain people think of me. And I kind of have that luxury where I don't have to care so much, but you're a little more, you work in a space where you need to have multiple relationships with a lot of people. And there's a pressure to show up in a certain way, right? Externally, but internally too, right? Like, so I think there's kind of two things there. Like there is a outside pressure to show up in a space in a certain way, but you also put that pressure on yourself, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so let's say like with posting to LinkedIn, you've done a couple, right? Over the last week?
Yep, I have
so,
two.
I don't know if we would just want to dive into like, well, how did you just not care? And so you did it? Like, oh, I'm not going to care. Like, you do care.
Yep.
So how did you go about doing it then?
Well, I mean, I think you're right. Yes, I do care. And it was really hard to put it out there. And I think like the way I did it was I had you look at the stuff before I put it out. You helped me like, which picture is better? This is what I'm trying to go for. Like, does this convey that? Like I had to be vulnerable because I really trust you and your perspective. But it's amazing how much thought and consideration maybe went behind what do I post? What do I say? Is it good enough? Am I showing up the way I want to show up? But I think that's how I maybe got over some of that is I had you look at the things and help me read through what message I wanted to say. It was kind of like you were kind of my like Laura filter.
Sure.
So to speak.
Yeah, I don't know. So I mean that sounds tiring, like feeling that felt heavy, like you just explaining the process of making a post.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so how are you going to keep doing it if it feels like that every time? Or did like from 0 to 1 posts, was that hard? And then the second post, was it a little easier or?
So 0 to 1 was hard.
Mm-hmm.
The second post wasn't as hard because I felt like I was still playing with it and trying to find my voice. I'll admit I have 2 more posts that I've thought about posting and I haven't done anything with it. One from last Saturday, one from this Thursday.
Going to ask if you made a post of that.
Nope.
Because it's like our wheelhouse. Like it was the music program, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I had gone to a concert and it was an amazing concert. And I took some pictures and I was going to post about it and I just didn't. And then I didn't the night of because I was tired. And then the next day I didn't because I had a busy day. And then I just didn't. And then I felt like it was too long. And then I thought, well, but maybe it's still okay. But then I started thinking, no, but I have a post from last Saturday. I was going to post this Saturday, but then I didn't do that either. So I'm like, well, maybe you could still. Does that make sense? So I'm overthinking it for sure.
Well, we both overthink things, but we don't necessarily overthink the same things.
Right.
And so like that like posting about that stuff, I would just post it out there. But I don't even know how many, like I'll overthink what TV to buy, just to name something really simple and easy. It's not on purpose, right? Like we're in our own head.
Yeah.
And so do you have any strategies to get away from, like we talked before, like to do certain work, you change your scenery.
Sure.
You usually have to snap me out of my overthinking and be like, will you just get on with it or just make a decision? Right. Like what's the worst that could happen kind of thing.
Right. Yeah. I think like one thing maybe, I know I do read quite a bit. I work with an executive coach who helps me work through some of this stuff too. I know you and I have lots of conversations about it. Mm-hmm. And so I think those things help me like figure out, okay, so what's the worst that's going to happen? So that'd be one strategy.
So talking about reading, we're trying to read / listen to the book. Do you remember what it's called?
Here, I'll find this.
It's The Perfectionist Guide to Losing Control, right?
Right.
I think.
Yep. Yeah. You're right.
I think we both index on learning to help us overcome obstacles, right?
Yeah.
And so we like to read. I like to listen to books and read books. I think I found this one somehow, right?
Yeah.
I don't know how, I don't know why it stood out to me. I added it to the cart or whatever, and then I think you saw it. We've been trying to listen to or read through it just to kind of like help us get some more perspective, right? Okay, what are these things that are limiting us? Like we both have perfectionist tendencies, right?
Right.
But in different ways. And this book talks about a few different ways that it shows up in people.
Yeah. Well, and I think the one thing that, just to go back to why it's intriguing for me, is so you and I are both musicians. And how often have we heard the phrase practice makes perfect, right? So there's like this idea that if you work hard enough and you do the work, that perfection is the ideal goal. I also think on the other side, the thing that I've been trying to contend with is that there's this ideal goal, right? That as musicians you strive to get to. But then at the same time, there's also this idea that perfectionism and being perfect and striving for that from a personality standpoint is somewhat seen as a bad thing. Like, oh, you're a perfectionist. You're just a perfectionist.
Yeah.
You know? And so there's these two sides that are just really conflicting, right? And they're hard to handle because in one side, it's like, yes, you want to strive towards things being permanent and smoother, right? But then you also don't want to be labeled necessarily a perfectionist because what's the stigma and connotations about the character flaw that brings and your rigidity.
Right. Interesting. So something I learned in studying music, actually, studying classical guitar, my instructor, he kind of changed my thought on that by saying practice makes permanent. It was because I was practicing, but I was practicing like on tempo. I wasn't practicing slow enough. So I kept making the same mistakes. And so he's like, slow down and do it right. And then get up to tempo as you go. And just if you keep doing it the same way, you're going to keep making the same mistakes. So it was just funny that you brought that up. And it was from the music program too. So
Right.
I totally agree. Like, I mean, I need to I'm just thankful that I can remind myself of that, of like, okay, it's never going to be perfect. I have to get that in my head. But at the same time, like you said, it's conflicting because we want everything to be perfect, because if you get 100%, that's perfect. But then like you go away and you're so like I can be so particular that I drive you crazy. And that's not good for our relationship if I'm expecting something to be a certain way that it really doesn't matter. It's just that it's kind of ingrained in me that no, if you're going to do it, you might as well do it right. It's like, well, there's a spectrum to that. It's interesting, that conflict of we're kind of programmed to strive for perfection, but then there's a stigma to it.
Right.
So that's interesting.
I guess we've been reading through the book. The thing that I thought was interesting, and you start talking about this, was about that there's different types of perfectionism. And I still remember this. We've been married for over 15 years, right?
Mm-hmm.
Just check me on my math there.
Yeah, over 15.
I think it was only a couple of years ago. I think I said to you that I was a perfectionist, and you kind of laughed out loud at me. You're like, sure. Maybe not just like that.
It was probably like, what are you talking about? I don't think you know what that means. It definitely shows up for us differently. Hey everybody, just a quick note. The Perfectionist Guide to Losing Control, A Path to Peace and Power. The author's name is Katherine Morgan Schafler. In our attempt to get past perfection, we never actually mentioned the author's name, so I just wanted to drop that in there. All right, let's get back to the episode. It definitely shows up for us differently.
So do you want to talk through was just the different types of perfectionism, maybe? And not because I'm trying to put us all in these clean little boxes, because I don't think that's necessarily helpful. But I think for me, it was helpful to try and articulate what it was that really helped me, or how it shows up for me, because it's a little hard to it was hard to get my head around how to explain it.
Yeah. It was really good to the way that she talks about it in the book. I like it because it's not about, I don't know, I haven't finished the book yet, but talking about how it shows up in different people, I could see myself in a couple of the different categories. It just depends on what's going on.
Just that overarching idea of perfectionism. Mm-hmm. I wrote down a quote that I thought was interesting too. Mm-hmm. And then we can go through the different kind of types.
Take it away.
They talk about perfectionists, that they never stop noticing the gulf between reality and the ideal. And they never stop longing to actively bridge that gap.
I remember listening to that part and I was like, yeah.
Right.
I'm always trying.
To bridge the gap between reality and the ideal.
Yeah, like I want it to be this way, but realistically, it just needs to get done, you know? And so I will delay in trying to make something perfect. And I mean, that's one of the types, you know? So
yeah. Should we get into it?
Yeah, get to the types.
Okay. So she talks about 5 different types. And the first is the classic perfectionist. This type is really what you would think about when you think of a perfectionist. They take pride in their perfectionism. They show up polished. They have a strong work ethic, and they just show up perfect. I don't know if there's anything more. I don't see myself as a classic perfectionist necessarily. I don't know about you, Keith.
I think the only part that stood out to me in that way where I was like, yep. Because like I don't show up perfect, but I'm always trying to do whatever task, whether I'm assigned the task or it's a task that I've set out for myself. I'm always trying to do it the right way. I've said that a lot, you know, on here. Like I'm always like, so there's a pretty heavy layer of if you're going to do it right. It's always kind of like over my head a little bit, like that I'm always trying to like not like I think I want to strive for perfection, but I also like the idea of like you strive for it, but you also need the realization that you're never going to attain it. And the point isn't to be perfect. Again, I have to tell myself this because I grew up thinking it had to be perfect, but I think the loftier goal I'm finding is just the attempt of trying to make it the best you can is what I try to strive for now. There's always that little nagging part of me that's like, I got to do it right.
Yeah, kind of those high standards for yourself.
Yeah. Yeah.
The second type is the one that I will say resonates the most with me. So it's the Parisian Perfectionist. So this one is all about how people see you. So the perception of how people see you and the reality and wanting to show up in the way that you want people to perceive you. And the thing that I thought that's interesting about this, and you can reflect back to me if this resonates with like how maybe you see me, but part of it is about
you want me to tell you how I see you. That's so funny. Like I think this is exactly why this is strongly your category.
Yes. So it has a layer of wanting to appear effortless in life, in the work that I'm doing. There's this sense of kind of that, who do I think I am to be doing things? So there's this sense of, I don't know if it's imposter syndrome or what it is, but then that I'm also emotionally influenced in how others perceive me, because whether or not I want to admit it, I do have a strong desire to have people see me in a way that's positive.
I think you care way too much what other people think. You care too much about what a lot of people think. And like I said, I care what people think, but there's maybe a handful to maybe two handful of people that I actually care what they think of me. So I'm a t-shirt and jeans kind of guy. I don't care if I'm supposed to not be wearing t-shirt and jeans. I like wearing t-shirt and jeans, right? Whereas if you're walking next to me and I'm wearing t-shirt and jeans and you think that maybe I shouldn't be, you're going to be embarrassed because you care what all these random strangers around us are thinking, you know?
Yeah.
I mean, I may be naive about it, but it's just like, I can't expend that much energy caring what a bunch of people think of me. There's only a select few people that I really care about that much to let them, their thoughts of me affect me. Yeah.
Yeah. I will say, I hear you. And sometimes I am surprised at how much I'm irked about how others perceive me. If that makes sense.
What do you mean you're irked by how others perceive you?
So I sometimes I'm surprised when a random comment on LinkedIn just gets under my skin, and it's like, how could that person think that that's like how I would show up? You know, like I think I take things really to heart. Of they should know that that's not what I want to. I don't know if condones the word, but that's not what I believe in or what I value.
I mean, those types, like there's comments of like why I got off of some social media is because I don't want to deal with certain people's comments.
Yeah.
Because they're just being contrary to be contrary.
Well, I mean, I think trying to think of a good example. So if I say I was posting, because I think that's the one that right now for me is the one I'm struggling with, and I have a goal to have a more intentional presence on social media related some to my personal life, but really like building the idea of kind of a personal brand too. So I think as I'm doing that, maybe an example could be if I do a post. And so here's a good example maybe. And this is a hypothetical because it hasn't happened yet. But say I was to post about the music program, right? That I went to this concert. What an amazing event. Thank you to all the musicians, blah, blah, blah. And I posted that out there. And somebody from a different area sees that I posted that. My fear, or the thing I worry about, is will people think, oh, she's favoriting that program because that's the program she graduated from? Would people think, oh, well, she's playing favorites? And so I don't know how my brain gets there. And I see your facial expressions right now.
Well, you work there.
I work there, but I also have a leadership position there. So I think there's this fear.
Oh, you mean so people within the same institution might be like, oh, why is she putting messages out about that program and not our program?
Right.
Oh, okay.
Or
I get that. Yeah.
On the other side,
you shouldn't care about that stuff.
Thanks, honey. But on the other side, like say I post on Instagram and it automatically goes to Facebook, right? And all I post about is work stuff. Will people that I went to high school with or friends and family think, geez, all she does is work. Wow. Okay.
And why would you care about that? That's what I don't get. Why do you care what people think? All she does is work. Who cares what they think? We know it's not all you do. Why do you care what they think?
I don't know. I mean, I think it goes back to that idea of being effortlessly perfect.
I guess. Sorry.
Right?
I don't mean to be...
No, it's good. Sometimes those questions can help shake me so I can...
The point of...
Get out of that paralysis.
This is the one question about that is the reason you care is because you care how people will perceive you.
Yep.
Now,
you got it.
I'm asking why do you care? Doesn't really help because you do. It's just the only reason I'm saying is why do you care is because I don't. I post things that I care about because it's in that way I attract more people that care about the things that I'm posting about. If it's not for you and you're going to come to my post and complain, you haven't told me anything except for that it's not for you. So why are you even here? And that is like me just saying, okay, you can go. It's not for you. And that's okay. And that's like building any community. Like, I think the strength is in we're not for everyone. And I don't want to be for everyone because we just don't agree on a lot of things.
Yeah. Yeah, I can't get there.
Really?
Because I care. I don't know why I care, but I care. And I think there's like this piece where
I care about a lot of people on a human level.
No, I know.
But I could care less what they think of me. Just want to be clear. I'll go to bat for people I disagree with on a human level. But if they don't like the color of my socks, I don't care.
See, and I would think if somebody doesn't like the color of my socks, I'm like, well, maybe they didn't see the picture the way that it actually looks, because maybe that color of purple is just better in person than online.
Whatever. Okay. All right. There's there's more types, right?
Yeah. Do you want to keep going?
Yeah.
Okay.
We don't have to, but
the other thing I did want to mention, and this is what resonated with me about how she described Parisian, is she said that the name Parisian is after the way French women exude an aesthetic sense of effortlessness when it comes to beauty, but behind the scenes do a lot more work than they care to admit or want others to know about.
Interesting.
Yeah. So you get to see behind the curtain. Well, now I've told everyone whoever's listening to the podcast behind the curtain.
Do you care too much? What?
That I care too much and I get bothered that I do care how people perceive or don't like the color of my socks. Yeah.
All right. So I know the next one because I made the list. The next one is me. A lot of me, right?
Yep. So it's the procrastinator, perfectionist. Do you want to talk a little bit about what this looks like or shows up like? Well,
it's kind of, I mean, you have the stuff in front of you, but procrastination is kind of my wheelhouse because I'm always waiting for the perfect time to start, right? And is this the same one too as like also like once you've already started, it's no longer has the capacity to be perfect.
Yep.
Right.
Yeah.
And so that I was like, oh, this is a whole lot of me, like a whole barrel full of Keith right here. And I need to journal on this just to like work through it because I'm so afraid of failing. I'm so afraid of doing it wrong that I'm like, this is me. This is a lot of me. I see myself in some of the other ones and like, I do care what other people think. And I'm a classic, like, I got to do it right. But I think this procrastination is like, it's the stalling tactic. This procrastination is a good place to hide too. And so it's like a kind of like a double-edged sword of one, I have super high standards, but two, I'll never accomplish them. It's fun.
I think one thing that I highlighted as we were going through it was it also said that the more self-aware that procrastinator perfectionists are, the more frustrated with themselves they can become.
So what are you saying there?
I'm just wondering, because I see you as a pretty self-aware human.
Yeah.
And I don't know if
do you see me frustrated often?
I'm not going to answer that.
Thank you.
I'll let you answer that.
I think everybody can read between the lines there. Yes, I'm self-aware. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Still waters run deep.
As she was talking about that the procrastinator perfectionist is actually her favorite type to work with.
Huh.
Because
give her my number.
There are two things, kind of revelations, not revolutions. Once individuals that have this type of perfectionism kind of start realizing it, and they realize these two things, it just opens up so much of what they can do. So the first is that it's not just talent that rises to the top, it's persistence.
Yeah. Okay.
And then the other thing she talks about is, well, change does always involve loss. Not changing involves a much deeper loss. Sorry, I'm getting a little deep there.
Yeah, I like that. Like that. I'll have to highlight that in my copy.
Yeah.
I like that. I was on another podcast and they kind of brought up like, oh, well, it was kind of like a beginning of the year, end of the year kind of thing. And they're like, oh, what are your goals? And we all kind of agreed like, oh, we're going to try to be healthier, and like me, it's more strength training, nutrition and all that. And then also what I said, aside from that, my goal for this year was to be more consistent and persistent. So that kind of like hits with me that you found that little blurb there, because it's kind of what I'm striving for. And in the way that I research to find inspiration to take action, the thing that comes up a lot is finding a way to persistently be consistent. And I mean, that's kind of what we're trying to do here too, as we fumble and stumble our way through getting this habit down and building what we're building here. It's just, you gotta just show up, and that's the only way you're going to get change. And yeah, it might be scary to change, but not changing is even like, it's not going to end well.
Right.
So I like that. Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah, of course. I do want to say one thing that you talked about, the starting the podcast and like trying to talk through it, and that it's scary, right? And it's like getting started is kind of hard with that. And I just want to note, if you look over at our little whiteboard, that the last 2 times we've put like some notes on. What do you see, Keith?
Episode 3, perfectionism, and then nothing else.
We couldn't get the perfect outline today.
No, we couldn't.
It's so just blank.
Yeah, it's a pretty much blank whiteboard.
So we may need to take a picture of that and post it on social, but what will people think?
Yeah.
Okay.
I like it.
The next type is messy perfectionist. And this type is more about individuals who take on lots of different things. So they love starting things, but they aren't great at finishing.
Yeah, this kind of resonated with me a little bit, in which I think it kind of goes it seemed like it went hand in hand with the procrastinator too, because I think once I start something, when they talked about in the procrastinator, like you start something and therefore it can never be perfect again kind of thing. Like as soon as you flip that switch, you can't unflip it. And so then the messy procrastinator, you start things, but maybe don't finish. It's like, I start a lot of projects and I don't necessarily finish them or finish them as quickly as I would like, because I'm trying to make it perfect. And so I resonated with that a little bit, but also it made me think of you, but it's because you have so many projects going, or you want so many things to be done. And you're like, well, and this thing and this thing and this thing. And then I get overwhelmed and I'm like, it's just, okay, we got to make a list,
Right.
And I can't hold all that in my head. I don't have the recall, but not to project that upon you, because you finish stuff, like you start, you finish, but it's not up to like maybe my standards, right? Like my particularness. And so it's a little bit there, but like for me, a little more for sure.
So one of the quotes that kind of speaks to how this resonates with me is that messy perfectionists blatantly ignore limitations and don't accept the notion that while you can do anything, you can't do everything.
Right. I feel like I've said that to you before, like in not so many words. I'm like, do we really have to do all of it?
All the things?
Like we don't need to do all the things. Pick 2.
Pick two. And it's like, but we can do it if we really try.
Yeah. Ugh.
And then we can fit it all in. Yeah. It's normally setting ourselves up to fail.
It's just it's exhausting.
Yeah. I do see myself in this one a little bit because you're right. I do like to start, and I can, if it's something that has to be done perfectly, sometimes that does. I mean, I have lots of projects, like craft projects, like in my closet that aren't done because I just haven't gotten around to finishing them, but I started them. I have how many thirds of a crocheted scarf, in my closet right now. But more often than not, I do what you were kind of saying is can I get to that 90%? I think and this might be a whole nother episode, I don't know, but there's a book called Finish, Give Yourself the Gift of Done by John Acuff.
I might have that on Audible, or maybe I've heard like a podcast with him on or something. Yeah. That sounds really familiar.
Yeah, he does a lot of different books. He has a book called Soundtracks, and this one really resonated with me. And I think this is something that is important to think about with perfectionism, as he talks a lot about the day after perfect. And so the idea that what are you going to do the day after it's not perfect anymore? That's what's going to get you to finish your goal or finish your project. That idea of, okay, like yesterday wasn't perfect. It wasn't what you planned or thought was going to happen, but your decision today to show up or today to get partially there can be helpful.
I think I say to you a lot, like your 90% is most people's 100%.
Right.
Well, maybe because sometimes you'll just kind of fiddle with things to make it perfect, or and I'm like, just it's good enough, move on, kind of thing.
Yeah.
I struggle with that too, but my struggles with those feelings are much lower stakes than yours. Like you're playing at a table with higher stakes than me when it comes to, if I cut some corners in my work at, whatever I'm working on, it's not really going to affect more than like 10 people in our life. Whereas if you cut certain corners, it's going to affect thousands of people.
But I will say, I mean, the thing that, like, yes, and I also think getting back to that idea of not talking about it as necessarily cutting corners, but
I guess that's not quite what I meant.
Yeah, I think of it more as like get to 90% and that's a good draft.
Yeah, that's a really good way of thinking about it.
Like I do that with grant writing or with, when I have to write a big report or something or presentation. Mm-hmm. You got to get there, and it's not going to be perfect right away. And if it was, I mean, I don't know if I've ever been in any sort of room with leaders where you do a project, everyone's like, nope, no questions, no modifications, no edits.
That makes me think of just being realistic, right? Going back to that, being aware of the fact that there can always be improvements and not pretending like something's perfect.
Should we go to the last type?
Yeah.
Which is intense perfectionism.
All I remember is it was kind of, they're direct, transparent, and kind of impulsive, right? Like, right. Or emotional or something.
More of a wild card in how they react.
Okay. And that made me think like emotional. I think maybe that's where that emotional came from. I was like, oh, kind of like showing up however they want to show up, regardless or something. I can't quite remember, but.
And I don't know if this resonates as much with either of us. Does it?
No, I know how to show up in spaces, even though I talk about like, oh, I'm just going to show up in t-shirt and jeans. It's like, well, if there's a dress code, I have to go. I'm going to put something on that I can not embarrass you wearing. I'm not super impulsive because I'm a procrastinator and I want to plan and I want to make sure it's going to be right. So, I mean, I can be impulsive in some things, but not when the stakes are high, I guess.
So, I mean, I think overall, I think it's helpful, right? The one thing I appreciated reading through the types is it does show that perfectionism's not more complicated, but incredibly more nuanced. And being a perfectionist doesn't mean necessarily that it's bad. It's just recognizing it. And then how can you harness those things to be your superpowers? Yeah.
Yeah. And I think the author, she says that in one spot, and it kind of stood out to me. I think I made a little note of like, finding a way to hone those gifts into skills, that can serve you and serve others, and not, I guess, maybe not feeling the shame of it, possibly. Like we talked about, like
Right.
that, a duality of like, it's so good in this aspect, but then in this aspect, everyone will kind of ridicule you for being such, this or that. And you have to be so perfect. It's like, well, it can be a strength, but just like anything, it's like, it can be a strength or it can be a weakness if you over index it. Right.
Right. It's one of those, if I overprocess the posting to social, eventually I just won't, right?
Yeah.
One thing, so I pulled up John Acuff's book, and one of the things that he says in there, that the problem with perfectionism is that it magnifies your mistakes and it minimizes your progress. And that really resonated with me, because like the only thing that I'm talking about right now and feeling is the 2 posts I didn't post.
Right.
I'm not thinking about the 2 I did and the reaction I got to those, which was incredibly positive. All I'm thinking about is the 2 that I failed to launch. So there was a few other things that you had noted in the book as well.
I don't think that's from the book. It's just things I thought of from listening to the book.
We'll talk about them.
Why?
Because I think that they were interesting thoughts, and it advances the idea of perfectionism beyond defining it. Okay. If you're okay with that.
Yeah, it's fine. So I must have been choring or something and listening to the book, but I had to stop and like write down it basically what she must have said, something that made me think of what's my goal. And she either said this or my response to it was, my goal is to engage in work that engages me. And that's kind of what I'm looking for. Is I'm not waiting for work to engage me. Like I need to engage in it, kind of thing. Like I don't wait to be picked kind of mentality, that like no one's going to pick me for their baseball team. If I want to be on a baseball team, I'm going to have to make it and I'm going to have to organize it, kind of thing. So, and then that kind of led, so I think I just kind of started going on like a little ramble out of my head. And it's just,
isn't that empowering and a little freeing to feel like you don't have to sit back and just wait for something to present itself for an opportunity, but that you can kind of make your own path?
Yeah. So the thing that I struggle with that is that I was ingrained to wait to be picked. And so the way that we are educated is we stand in a line and like, let's say it's dodgeball, right? And the gym teacher goes down the line and just counts off 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, or they assign 2 captains for baseball and people pick you. Well, that's not how it works anymore. If you're waiting to be picked, like American Idol's not going to pick me.
Sure.
Do you know what I mean? Like it's scary if it's all you know is to sit and wait to be picked, like wait for the promotion, right? Well, here, don't wait for a promotion. Show people that you're indispensable and that they're going to be worse off if you go, because you're so incredible.
Well, it's not even. I don't mean that to sound spiteful.
I don't mean to sound spiteful.
It's like you're sounding a little.
No. I mean, I'm trying to say like what you're saying. Like look towards the empowerment of, you have the ability to make your own path by being indispensable.
But what you're saying still, though, by being indispensable is
undeniable, I think is what I mean.
Well, but you're still relying on others to, at the end of the day, recognize that you're indispensable and undeniable to pick you, it feels like.
Maybe.
And so,
I mean, how many founder CEOs can there be, though? Somebody's going to have to be the number 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 at a job.
That's true.
I'm not saying that like it's a bad thing. I'm just.
What I'm getting from what you're saying, though, is that you're thinking within the playing field that you have. You're not thinking about different. You're not thinking beyond. And I'm not trying to say that like that's bad necessarily, but like here's an example. To get to the position I am right now, I had to make a series of really intentional career moves, right? And shifts. I went from in my field that I went to school for to a really intentional data type role back into my field. And maybe that's kind of what you're talking about. But there was a point too where there were skills that I was gaining that weren't necessarily in my primary field. And I mean, sometimes like it's safer maybe to stay in the like playing the sport. If we're going to like a sport metaphor, like you're used to playing, right? The career and the field that you're used to being in. But there's so many competencies and skills that can benefit in different areas.
I agree.
And so,
But I mean, so I think you're almost, and I'm not trying to spar with you, but your example of you going away from what you studied to get more skills, right? Is what I'm talking about. You made, like, people noticed that. I'm not saying you do it so people notice. I'm saying you acquired skills that gave you an advantage over other people. And so when you bring up sports, it's like, it makes me think of like boxers going and taking ballet so they can work on their footwork.
Yeah.
So when I'm talking about making yourself indispensable, it means more of you're leveling yourself up and giving yourself more of an opportunity to succeed at whatever you want to choose. I mean, I think we're saying the similar things. We're just saying it differently.
Yeah. I guess maybe I was thinking that you were saying that you should get the different skills to benefit the current situation and position that you're assuming.
No, I'm saying
in company that you're with.
I'm saying you do what's going to help you succeed in where you want to go. And
okay.
I mean, if that's for a company, that's fine. And that's why I said, if you want to be the number 3, 4, 5 at a company, that's great. That's a kind of a Gary Vee thing. Some people will be much happier being number 11 employee than the founder that has to constantly worry about where payroll's coming from next month.
Right.
Yeah. I'm all about like people being empowered to like having that agency is kind of what you were saying, and that empowerment of choosing what you want to be, right?
Yeah.
So I was just saying that it's more work for me to think that way. I think I learned at a younger age, back to perfectionism, show up the right way, do it right, make it perfect, and then somebody will give me a sticker, and then I'll be...
Do you like stickers?
I kind of. You used to get stickers on your paper?
Yeah.
I did. It felt good getting a sticker, because I got 100% or 90, It wasn't always 100%, obviously. But perfection is a myth, and it's a place to hide, is what I need to remind myself of. And there's a lot more you can do if you kind of forget trying to attain something that isn't realistically possible.
When you're talking about being raised, at least this is what I heard, kind of being raised to do things the right way or perfect or the way that you should do it.
Yeah, I mean, it's from family, it's from schooling, it's just, I mean, I think it's just what I experienced. My eyes have kind of been opened beyond that now. Like, anyway, go ahead. What were you saying? What were you saying?
So I guess what I was saying is I feel, and I know I see it just slightly different.
Good.
Maybe. Just because of some of the conversations that I had when I was growing up. So, I mean, I'm, cisgender female. And I grew up in the 80s, but I can't tell you how many conversations I had with my mom or with my grandma, but especially my mom around gender roles and breaking free of those. And so I'm not trying to get all deep about gender and all of that. But I think what's interesting is that yes, there was some of those perfection type things that were baked into me via, music and school and get good grades. But I think there was also that pressure being a woman, like that pressure that society thinks that you should be doing specific types of careers, that you should, and things have changed since then, but that
but we're still working on it, right?
Yeah, we're always working on it. But I do think that was something that having that experience and all those conversations growing up definitely shook my what girls could do and what girls can do. It shifted it from you should be to what do you want to be. So it was more of an empowering agency type conversation. And I don't know if I'm sure it influenced me. I know it influenced me. But I wonder if that also influences somewhat how I show up around doing the right thing the way people think I ought to do it. At the same time, I do care about what people think. So I don't know. Maybe it's all baked into there.
Yeah, I didn't have to deal with that. The role that I'm in, the role I come from, they don't want change. But I mean, we don't have, our relationship is much different than our parents and what they grew up in a way of stereotypical gender roles, right? Like, I stayed home with the kids.
I'm really good at taking the garbage out.
Yeah, because you wake up. But, I was really good at staying up until 3 a.m. because the kids were crying, right?
Yep. I was good at going to work.
Yeah. I can go to work too. Jeez, don't make it sound like I can't hold down a job.
Oh, no. Oh, gosh. Okay, you're going to have to cut that out. No, I wasn't saying I can go to work and you won't go to work. I'm just saying I think I will say the one thing that I always struggle with, because people often ask me, and they always have, right? Like, so what does your husband do? Like, and it's a inane question, right? Like, it's a small talk type question. And to say, oh, I often will say, oh, well, he's stay-at-home parent, or, depending on where we were at in our life. But people are like, oh, well, that's so new age. You were talking about not finishing things, right? So one thing that I thought about, and this is maybe a little lighter, I have a rule around book reading. So growing up, I never really enjoyed reading. I wasn't good at it. I wasn't fast. I was a kid who, like all the reading tests, I couldn't read the excerpts fast enough to actually answer the questions and comprehend it. I've always thought I may have some undiagnosed like dyslexia or something like that. I was a terrible speller. I actually have a dictionary from, I think it was like 8th grade, that is organized by phonetics, not by spelling. I want to say that so everyone knows that the fact that I actually enjoy reading books now is
incredible, right?
Crazy.
It's awesome.
Yeah. So I have this rule, and it kind of pushes up against my perfectionism in a way that's a little uncomfortable. What do you do if you're reading a book and you just don't like it? Do you keep going? Do you have an agreement with yourself of like a certain like taste test of the book that you'll allow yourself to stop once you get to XYZ pages? How do you approach that?
I think I heard something about this recently, actually, which is funny. I was probably listening to a podcast, and they said, if I get 100 pages in and it's not doing it for me, I stop. Life's too short. Same with if I go to a 2-hour long movie and I'm not feeling it after 30 minutes or whatever they say, I walk out. Part of me is like, but you just spent, it's that sunk cost thing. It's like, but you spent money on that. It's like, yeah, you spent maybe $15-20 now on a movie.
Sure.
And is another hour and a half of your life worth $7.50 because you already watched a half hour? No, it's not. If it's not gelling with you, I say walk away. And that's something I want to practice more often, is like being able to walk away from things that are not living up to my expectations or maybe my standard. Is that the right way of saying it? I don't want to come off sounding a certain way. Or
maybe just something that you're not enjoying.
Yeah, if I'm not
be that simple?
if I'm not enjoying it, I don't want to put myself through more of it because life's too short. And I mean, so I'm just going to go off a little more here. It makes me think of with music. I learned from a mentor of mine, a hockey coach. He gave me a mixtape when I was younger, and he's like, "Now you have to listen to each side," because it was a cassette. He's like, "You have to listen to both sides at least twice before you pass any judgments." And so I'll do that with music if I really want to give it a shot. But a lot of times, if it doesn't resonate with me, I'm not going to sit there and try to listen to it 2 times in a row. If somebody vouches for something and says, really seriously, give this a good listen, I'll be like, okay, I'm going to listen to this at least twice. But if it's coming to like a novel, it's going to take me 15-24 hours to read. I'm not going to, it's just not worth. There's so many things out there that I haven't read that I should read, or I feel like I should read, right? Should I myself? There's a lot more things out there that if I'm not enjoying something, I should move on.
How many pages is enough pages to figure that out?
That I think maybe depends on the book. It might be like a ratio for how many pages like a book is. I mean, if it's a 350 page book and you're not feeling it by page 50 or 75, is it really worth the rest of the way to go? I don't know if it is.
So I have like 100 pages is what I typically.
Yeah, but 100 pages of a 400, that's a quarter of a book.
I know.
That's a lot to read. And then, so in my head, I'm thinking probably from page 10 on, for 90 pages, you're like, I can't believe I'm still reading this.
There's a book recently I felt that way about.
I haven't finished it. I haven't picked it up in like 3 weeks because we were kind of having our own little book club, and I can't get into it. The one we're reading with the kids, I'm more interested in that one, and I don't really want to mention what book it is that I'm not into because
because other people really like it, right? Or could like it.
But like both, as you were reading it, I was on pace with you for a little bit, and then you're like, yeah, I'm not really feeling it. And I'm like, me either. It's like, it's just not what I expected, I think. And in 2 years, I could go back to it and maybe it'd be the most thrilling thing I've ever read. Anyway, we're reading Percy Jackson with the kids for our book club. And it's like fast paced, and we're only like 75 pages in. And I'm just like, this is awesome. I want to read the next 5 chapters.
I was saying this morning during a little family book club that I took Greek mythology in college, and I'm like making all these connections, and it's exciting. I'm like, yes, that course is coming in handy right now. But no, Percy Jackson, highly recommend.
Yeah, so far so good, right?
Yeah.
I mean, 75 pages in, I don't remember how long it is, but I mean, it's a decent length. Was it like 350 pages?
It's got to be close to 400, yeah.
It was something like that. But it's like, I mean, we've read a good sized chunk of it where it's like, yeah, I'm bought in and I'm going to go along for the ride.
Right. But the other one,
you must have slogged through that.
I powered through it.
And with somebody that has a history of like not loving reading as a kid.
Well, but it does come to my perfectionism, right? Like somebody gave it to us.
Completionist, right?
The completionist. Somebody gave it to us and said it's one of their favorite books. And I thought, well, who am I, or what am I not getting? And it was good in that it challenged some like heteronormative society. And so I do think
it has nothing to do with why I don't like it. It's just a slog.
So I do think it was, I don't know what the word is. It wasn't really heady, but it was a good take on a classic, but it was a slog. It was hard to get through, but someday you and I will.
I can try to power through it sometime, but I got to get the Percy Jackson reading done for this week first. So I'm way more excited to read that. I thought of a question to ask. I think I know the answer, but it's still interesting. So what's more disappointing, starting and never finishing, or finishing but it's not perfect?
It's a really good question. What's more disappointing? Starting and not finishing.
I'm not sure. Like, it's pretty disappointing never starting, but honestly, I think there might be a third thing here, or this might be what I meant by like starting but never not getting it perfect. Starting a project and never quite finishing it. Like, I could finish it, but it's not going to be right. It's like it's kind of a mix for me. But yeah, it's pretty disappointing to like start something and then it's just like, oh, like I can't. It never got finished. It just kind of hangs over you. I'd rather get it done and have it not be right, and be able to move on and start that process again with whether it's a new piece or whatever. But I wrote that down earlier because I was like, oh, you were saying something.
Mm-hmm. I didn't get into the actual solutions in the book.
Well, maybe, I think it's nice just to be able to get to recognize some of yourself in these types and just have the awareness. It's almost like somebody acknowledging something that or being able to name something that you felt but never had the words to describe. There's some comfort to that. Like, oh, other people experience things similar to me. Not maybe exactly the same, but like if she can describe these different types and I can see myself as part of some of them, cool. I'm not alone, right? Like,
yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
It feels good to be seen, right?
Yeah, or I think it's just not to be alone. Like if somebody wrote a book on this, it's because other people have experiences that are very similar. And I guess that makes you feel seen, but I think it also makes you feel heard. I think that's really important, is like the idea of people hearing what I have to say or acknowledging my perspective. I guess I index on sound more than visuals, but that's probably because I have horrible eyesight. I have pretty good hearing and I like music.
one thing that's hard for me is to recognize something that potentially could get us stuck without thinking about what solutions or strategies do we have, right?
Oh, so like, perfectionism. We're perfectionists and we struggle with trying to be perfect and blah, blah, blah. And that's basically all we said.
Yeah.
Well, we don't necessarily need a solution. We're talking about something that affects us, right? I mean, we didn't write the book on it.
Yeah.
But we're reading the book. I mean, just the fact that, like we said, like just being seen or being heard it feels good. And so how many other people maybe feel the way we feel about, oh, why can't I just do it? Or why can't I get out of my own way? If you've heard that before, like this is going to be something that maybe brings a little solace, like, oh, other people deal with this too, kind of thing. It's just, it can just be like, it can be as simple as that. Like, hey, this is something that we deal with too. And we're trying to figure out maybe how to traverse it, but we're still in the stage of trying to find solutions.
And maybe even just acknowledging, because I think so often, like all of us have been put into boxes, right? Like specific boxes. That's what you do, right? When you do surveys and the census or whatever, and we like have to check what box are you a part of. And I think so often, and I think that's some of the nature of humans, right? Is figuring out who we are and what our world is around us. And so I think sometimes expanding that and not having it be as simplistic as maybe social media or media in general tells us perfectionism is, like those two tensions we talked about before. It's something to strive towards, and it's also something to be, I don't know if shameful is the word of, but it's also a negative if you're a perfectionist, like something to be fixed.
Yeah.
Maybe not shame, but fixed, which no one likes to feel like they have to be fixed.
No.
And I was just trying to say that I think it's important we recognize that we aren't just easily put into boxes.
Yeah. Humans love pattern and we see patterns well. It's like one of our greatest strengths. But like you said, it doesn't have to be that simple. There can be some gray area, right? Like, I mean, it's good to understand, like we crave that black or white, but on another level, we also want the freedom of going into the gray area and like having some ambiguity, I think. So that's my little rant. Anything else you want to talk about?
Well, I mean, I think one of the biggest things, and we talked about this last time too, but around perfectionism is just getting started, doing it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Getting out there, posting the post, starting the project.
Yeah, what is it? It's like not being so, don't be so romantic about it in a way. Because I fall into that trap of like my perfectionism is it needing to be perfect means I'm so in love with an idea I have that I can't let it actually come to fruition because it's not perfect. It's not the way that's something else too. It's like my thoughts, my ideas of what I want to make, I don't have the ability to actually make it. And it's this like Sisyphean thing that like creatives have. It's like my desire to create something is higher than my ability to create it. And it's really daunting to not be good enough to create something that's in my head. It's just.
But I think what's so interesting is if you started creating what's in your head and you repeated creating it 5, 10, 20 times.
Exactly.
It would get to the point where you wanted it to be.
Yeah. And that's the next thing, right? Like that's
practice.
So like, yeah, that the practice.
Right. It goes back to practice.
The practice is the point, right? It's not about doing the thing perfectly. It's about the process of going on that journey of attempting perfection.
So do you have any final thoughts?
Oh, I want to say the right thing.
Of course you do.
Okay. Tendencies to be perfect is a good thing to be aware of, but just try not to fall into the pitfalls and the traps that it leads you down, because you got a lot more to lose trying to be perfect than you do to gain.
Yeah. And I guess for me, maybe specifically the way that my perfectionism shows up, one thing that I know that I can do is instead of sitting there and struggling, perhaps I can continue to connect with you and talk through it. I think that's incredibly helpful for me. I also think just knowing that we're doing the best we can, that we're showing up honestly with good intention and letting that be good enough, right?
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. Oh my goodness.